Very kind. Thank you so much. My goodness, what a kind introduction. I have to say, when we studied together and I had a chance to learn under your tutelage, you were a wonderful tutor, and I think you even said it yourself, when I left, I gave you a copy of Clausewitz. What else would I do as a former military guy but throw a little Clausewitz back at this wonderful institution? You know, before I jump into this, I will say that it struck me, the motto of Special Forces is De oppresso liber, to free the oppressed. And as people started ripping into the Latin that went around that, they realized it wasn't really about freeing people that were oppressed overseas. Of course, Green Berets were knuckle-dragging apes. That made sense to us. That's what it meant to us. But what it really meant was freeing yourself, to be able to free yourself so that you can go out and do the work that you were put on earth to do, to find your purpose, to find what you're supposed to be doing. And when you talked about the freedom that books give you, that resonates with me, and I'm hopeful that what I give tonight will somehow pay a little bit of that back. So if I may, I'd like to say greetings to, of course, Admiral and Mrs. Kristensen. Thank you so much for allowing me to give this speech tonight. It's an honor to pay homage to your son. Nora Demleiter, President, Mr. President, Madam President, may I? Thank you again for inviting me tonight. I'm very excited. I would say, if I may, Mike Zampella, where are you hiding? There we are, the man who set this up many years ago. Thank you very much. To the Navy SEAL Foundation that helps fund this wonderful lecture series. I had a chance to meet Jen Roner tonight. Jen, where are you? There we go. So for the Navy SEAL Foundation, thank you very much. The Naval Academy is Alumni Association Foundation. I had a chance to meet Jeff Webb and his wonderful wife this evening. To the Johnnies of St. John's College, it's an honor to be before you tonight. To the midshipmen of the Naval Academy, I see a few of you out there. Distinguished guests, faculty members of both institutions, ladies and gentlemen, and if I may, he's not here tonight, he's overseas in Europe, but if I may give a special shout out to Howard Zeiderman, one of my tutors who actually helped me develop some of these thoughts and helped pull some of these thoughts out of my head and develop them in a form that I might give you tonight. And another friend of mine, Tom Maher, who passed away 2 years ago on April 3rd, 2022, a Navy SEAL, who also helped link up the Navy SEAL Foundation with St. John's College to work on the funding aspect of this lecture series. So thanks to everyone who's done this, but really, if I may say thank you to the Kristensen family for this honor and opportunity. And I'd like to talk a little bit by starting with your son. So first off, I'm humbled to have been asked to give this lecture series, the 2024 Erik S. Kristensen Memorial Lecture. Lieutenant Commander Kristensen, Buds Class 233, gave his life, as Nora said, serving as a task unit commander for SEAL Team 10, bravely leading a daring rescue mission during Operation Red Wings in Afghanistan on the 20th of June, 2005. Wanting to know something about this man for whom this lecture series is named, I reached out to a few of his friends and acquaintances, and from those conversations, I conclude that Erik was a Renaissance man, comfortable in his own skin, courageous, curious, creative, pensive, mischievous, genuine, and a natural leader who, when not wearing combat boots, was wearing Birkenstocks. Hemingway-like, authentic, and entirely at ease when commanding. I've been told that people were drawn to him, pulled by a quiet charisma that he possessed. I wish I would have known him. I hope that my talk tonight would have interested him. I'd like to think that would have, because having been a graduate of both Annapolis and St. John's College, he, to my mind, was both a poet and a warrior. And after all, tonight, the name of my lecture is Reclaiming Our Intuition, the Poetic Conduct of War and Diplomacy in the Age of AI. So I dedicate my lecture tonight to Erik's memory and to honor this remarkable man. But I have to give you a caveat, if I may. A long time ago when I was 17, I came to Annapolis to take a look at the Naval Academy. And I was very excited about it. While I was touring the grounds of Annapolis, I looked across the road and saw St. John's, and I asked, what's that place over there? They told me a little bit about the Great Books program, and I actually literally thought, I wonder if I should be going there instead of a military academy. Well, as it turned out, I didn't have to worry about that. Apparently, I wasn't smart enough to get into the Naval Academy. And why that's important is the speech you're about to hear tonight. You know, Brendan, you were amazing. You know, your words just absolutely hit everything. In fact, we could have quit tonight. Your speech was so good, we could have all gone home at that point. If you want that type of a speech that's uplifting, that really just pulls it in, that's all right, that's just perfect, that's probably next year's speech. I'm a Green Beret, I'm a West Point graduate, not smart enough to get in the Naval Academy. We're going to struggle through this speech, but we're going to have some fun. So with that in mind, I want to first, before we dig into this, I'm going to take a survey. I want to gather some data. I want to mull over some of the facts here. Do me a favor and raise, I know I hate doing it too. If I was in the audience, I wouldn't want to play the game, but I'm going to ask you to play the game. Show of hands, please, if you've ever made what you consider to be an intuitive decision. Okay, a lot more than I thought. Okay, a lot more than I thought. Raise your hands, please, if you've not made a decision. In other words, you decided not to make a decision based on your intuition, and you later regretted it. Okay, not as many. My wife, that's probably our marriage. I'm sorry, honey, but we'll figure that out. Raise your hands if you've ever explored artificial intelligence, AI. Pat, I know you've used ChatGPT. I know you have. Raise your hand. Come on. Okay. Raise your hands if you fear AI. Yeah, that's legit. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to see if I can use this thing here. There we go. If you fear AI, you're not alone. So if you take a look at the two stories, this one's from the New York Times. And in this one, this is Sam Altman. Does anyone know who that is? This is the guy that created ChatGPT. 350 executives who helped create AI signed a document of which there's only one sentence. It didn't go into paragraphs, one sentence. That sentence is mitigating the risk of extinction from AI. That means they kill every human being on Earth. Mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks such as pandemics and nuclear war. The guys who created AI, they're worried about the entire human race being wiped out. Elon Musk, this is like 7 or 8 days ago. Elon Musk says by 2030, we're probably to the point that we hit this thing called singularity, meaning that machines finally become smarter than humans. They are smarter than everything that we can bring together in what we call human intelligence. Now, by the way, if you're a St. John's, I would say either graduate or student, raise your hands, please. All right, guys, what does it mean by human intelligence? We're going to delve into that because I think, well, let me just jump into the next slide. Here we go. Long before he made that movie, Titanic, and long before he produced Avatar, James Cameron made this gem. 1984, The Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I better read this because it's actually kind of like deep here. It says, Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator, a cybernetic assassin sent back in time from 2029, that's 5 years from now, to 1984 to kill Sarah Connor, played by Linda Hamilton, whose unborn son will one day save mankind from extinction from Skynet, a hostile artificial intelligence in a post-apocalyptic future. So, way back in the olden days, we were still kind of worried about the machines taking over and killing us. Now, by the way, spoiler alert, there have been 6 of these Terminator films. The humans win in every single film. That gets into human intelligence. If the machines are going to be smarter than us one day, how do we keep beating them in these movies? Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit. So, thousands of years before the Terminator hit the movie screens, thousands of years before, I know I'm old, maybe some of you have actually seen this movie, thousands of years before Arnold Schwarzenegger ever said, I'll be back, we had another episode where an empire was brought to ruins from someone seeking answers from an ancient version of ChatGPT/Skynet. Here we go. Okay, if you're St. John's, you know this one. The Lord, whose oracle is in Delphi, neither declares nor conceals, but shows by a sign. Heraclitus, a pre-Socratic philosopher. So the quote on the screen is given to us by Heraclitus, a philosopher who lived around 500 years BC in the town of Ephesus, which is located on the western shores of what is now Turkey. That fragment refers to the writings, or the fragment of the writing refers to the Pythia, who was the high priestess or the oracle at Delphi, at the Temple of Apollo, which was located near the ancient Greek city of Corinth. Now, back in the old days, roughly 1400 BC to 300 AD, if a person in a city-state wanted to get a hard decision made, such as whether to begin a war or to sue for peace, they could journey to Delphi to seek the predictive counsel from the oracle. But if you look at that quote again, you notice a problem. The oracle doesn't give a firm yes or no. It gives a sign. Now, the Greek historian Herodotus, in his work, The Histories, tells us of the cautionary tale of Croesus, the incredibly wealthy king of Lydia, who asked of the oracle at Delphi whether or not he should go to war with the Persians. The oracle's response: if Croesus goes to war, he will destroy a great empire. Well, armed with that answer, Croesus made haste to attack the Persians, only to suffer a catastrophic defeat. It seems that the oracle had been hinting to the Lydian king that the empire to be destroyed was his own. Now, I find this fascinating. Like, what happened there? Like, how did Croesus get this so wrong? How did he misinterpret the oracle? Maybe my big question is, why was he going to the oracle in the first place? What I find so troubling is I actually see me in that story. In fact, frankly, I don't want to speak for all of you, but I see a lot of us. So how do we know when we finally know something? And once we know, how do we make our decisions? What resources and processes do we use to make those decisions? I think that most people would say that we use our reason and we apply it to our experiences, our context, our belief systems. We get the advice of friends and advocates, and sometimes we even use cold, hard facts. Assisting us nowadays, we have all these technologies like AI. We have the internet. We have big data. We have nano and biotechnologies. All these things are helping us to gather and marshal and analyze information with which we render our judgments. We have never before had so much information and so much decision-making power at our fingertips. And yet, if this was a good thing, how come we're struggling to achieve our war aims in our recent wars? Why are we surprised by the collapse of Wall Street? Why are we still struggling to anticipate the seismic events that keep happening to us? How come we can't course correct and get in front of all these things that keep happening in our world? Like Croesus, we're turning to the oracles of technology, and we're looking for answers. And like Croesus, we're mistaking these answers for the truth, when in fact they're merely a sign. I believe that our reliance on logic, data, and technology to increase our ability to know and do has resulted in the withering, discrediting, and maybe even the forgetting of an attribute provided to humanity to help us make decisions: our intuition. Now, the very books read here at St. John's College show that there was a time when reason and intuition were in balance. But events such as the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and the rise of modern technology have swung the pendulum far to the side of logic, and it's left little space for intuition. And by the way, not saying that the Enlightenment wasn't a good thing, incredibly good, but that pendulum may have swung too far. I think it's time to reclaim our intuition, and in doing so, regain a little bit of what makes us human. But you're probably wondering, like, well, what does Roger actually think that intuition is? Good question, here we go. So I like Pascal's definition. By the way, there are a lot of definitions that you can pull from the masters, but Pascal seemed to resonate with me. And I'll read this aloud, not because in the military they teach you don't read a slide. If you put, right? I'm looking at a military officer. If you put a slide up, don't read it. But someone's filming me, and I actually have to read it, okay? Are we good with that? I'm gonna read these slides? Okay, here we go. So it's not necessary to set it out logically as in mathematics, because the necessary principles are not ready at hand, and it would be an endless task to undertake. The thing must be seen all at once, at a glance, and not as a result of progressive reasoning. And I love what he said here. Later on, he goes, the heart has its reasons, of which reasons know nothing. So why am I interested in this? Why is this important to me? Well, I'll tell you. Nietzsche has a way of like putting things together. I find his writings fascinating. And I love what he said. He said, it's possible to present an image of a man in 3 anecdotes. For mine, I will choose Afghanistan, Somalia, and St. John's College. And Pat, you were in some of these, and I'm going to ask you not to out me or say anything that counters anything I'm about to say now. Are we good? Beth, are we also good? Okay, I have a lot of spies in this audience. I want to make sure we're all on the same sheet of music here. Okay, so we're going to try another quote here. Learning many things does not teach good sense, for it would have taught Hesiod and Pythagoras, and also Xenophontus and Hecataeus. The point here is you can learn as much as you possibly can and still kind of miss what's happening. From 2009 to 2011, I served in Afghanistan as the leader of a team of analytically talented combat vets who worked directly for the commanding general of the effort, and whose mission was to find out what was working and what was not working. The members of this organization numbered about 50, and we had full access to the battlefield, from a 9-man infantry squad in places like Kunar and Kandahar to the 4-star general sitting in Kabul. As such, we would find ourselves in a firefight one day, and after wiping the dust off our uniforms, find ourselves briefing senior leaders the very next. As a result, I was well positioned to witness the entire spectrum of the war. What I observed was 168,000 people in a coalition of 49 countries of the most technologically advanced nations on earth, fielding the best trained, equipped, and organized and led forces this world has ever seen, pitted against a small band of poorly equipped and miserably funded insurgents armed with only cell phones, AK-47s, RPGs, and improvised explosive devices, and using tactics that would have been familiar to those who fought against Alexander the Great. Our enemies fought intuitively. They embraced ambiguity, and they moved fluidly. At the battalion level and below, we were equally adept. In fact, I would argue better. Our troops were brave, resilient, creative, and clear about the tasks given to them. But at levels higher than a battalion being about 750 people, at levels higher than the battalion and the brigade, things began to become a little more opaque. I think that clarity seemed to dissipate a little bit as senior leaders wrestled with trying to understand and fight a counterinsurgency. In an effort to subdue our opponents, we not only attempted to find better ways to fight, but we also tried to understand and address the root causes and the core grievances of those who fought against us. Things like poverty, lack of political representation, and access to justice. As such, we sought integrated solutions to security, economic development, good governance, and the rule of law. The coalition often turned to the oracles of data and technology, arraying its forces mathematically, embracing certainty, while trying to decrease and mitigate risk. Yet during my travels, I observed that sometimes decisions were delayed due to the desire for more information, for perfect information. The mountains of data that we were bringing in, collecting, and analyzing seemed to show everyone that we were winning. But after years of surveying the war from top to bottom and from stem to stern, I sensed in my gut that despite the courage and determination of the coalition's warriors, we were losing, and I did not entirely understand why. Seeking answers, I packed my bags and headed to Somalia, where a low-tech, poorly trained, ill-equipped, barely funded third world military coalition was, at that time, beating an insurgency. I intended to find out why the efforts in Somalia were succeeding, while ours in Afghanistan were seeming to fail. Arriving in northern Somalia, I spent some time observing an effort to train and employ a Somali military force missioned to combat the scourge of piracy. Later, I went down to Mogadishu, where I worked for the African Union Mission in Somalia in their fight against the insurgent group Al-Shabaab. Now, the forces that were fighting the pirates and fighting Al-Shabaab, they were different, but they shared one commonality. Because they were not resourced to pull in reams of data like we were in Afghanistan, they had to make decisions without a complete grasp of the situation. And they seemed to be at peace with that. As Clausewitz says, the German war theorist, many intelligence reports in war are contradictory, even more false, and most are uncertain. I think the people that I was working with in Somalia Somalia figured that out and were able to push on without having that perfect information. As a result, the decisions that they made were at times hard to understand. But I knew that they were listening to something that I could not hear and moving to a rhythm that both they and their enemies sensed. Now, Shakespeare in King Lear writes that there's nothing like the necessity of force, not like necessity to force a man to confront nature. But after a year and a half in Somalia, confronting the nature of war, followed by yet another year in Afghanistan, I was still unable to find the answers to the questions that I was seeking. I saw the problems, but I did not have the language or the lens with which to evaluate them. It seemed that the more that I learned, the less that I knew. Now, it was at this juncture that I decided I needed to walk away from the study of war and just spend some time thinking about other things. In this case, what does it mean to be human? And how does one live a life that is good, true, and beautiful? To that end, I entered St. John's College to pursue a master's degree in the liberal arts. I started to read, explore, and engage with the great texts: Homer, Aristotle, Plato, Hobbes, Locke, Montaigne, Rousseau, Shakespeare, Kierkegaard, Kant, Hegel, just to name a few. And as I immersed myself deeper into these works, as I struggled to understand my humanity, something unexpected began to happen to me. Bit by bit, I started to get the answers to the questions that I'd sought during my many years at war. With every book that I read, I seemed to get another piece of the puzzle, another paint stroke in that mosaic that would, when completed, show me what I had been missing, or perhaps more accurately, remind me of what I'd forgotten. In my years overseas, I'd studied the nature of war, but I'd kind of forgot about, and less so, studied the nature of man. I'd been focusing on the external and not the internal. Contemplating the work of both the great philosophers and leaders led me to conclude, in Afghanistan, we've been using logic and gathering data to divine the rules for fighting a counterinsurgency and make good decisions. But in doing so, we were trying to mathematize that which cannot be mathematized: war. Resultantly, we left little space for intuition in evaluating information and rendering decisions. And I get this. After all, senior leaders have to justify, rightly so, their decision to political leaders, congressional budget committees, as well as their own servicemen and citizens. Additionally, the price of getting it wrong can result in the loss of a war, civilian casualties, and the loss of lives of the troops that they command. In my own life, I recalled that I used my intuition with ease well into my 30s. I know what you're thinking. I probably look like I'm 35 or 36. I know, stop. I'm about 60. I know what you're thinking. But I tell you, as I got into my 40s and 50s, my responsibilities increased. And as that happened, my decisions had to be explainable and defendable. It became harder to tell a congressman or a general that I did something because I felt it in my gut. So I did what most of us do. I followed the ways of Aristotle that advise us to break down the complex and reduce our problems to a set of first principles and rules. And I believed Bacon, who asked us to use reason to understand natural phenomena and then use it in understanding to make war on nature and then make that work for us. And in doing so, I think that I, and maybe others, began to lose some sense of what the Germans call Fingerspitzengefühl, that intuitive feeling of the battlefield. We began to trust our logic and numbers while doubting our inner voice. And yet Homer, Herodotus, and Thucydides remind us that there's an enduring and unchanging nature to war. It's chaotic, it's frenetic, unpredictable, and as Tolstoy wrote in War and Peace, nothing can be determined, and everything depends on innumerable conditions, the significance of which becomes manifest at a particular moment, and no one can tell when that moment will come. Or, as my good close personal friend Clausewitz says, in short, absolute so-called mathematical factors never find a firm basis in military calculations. From the very start, there's an interplay of possibility, probabilities, good luck, and bad that weaves its way throughout the length and breadth of the tapestry. In the range of human activities, war most closely resembles a game of cards. In this light, war now seems to me to be a unity of opposites. It's the realm of both philosophy, what is, and poetry, what could be, of man and gods. It's at every moment being and becoming, and it denies Aristotle's notion of non-contradiction, and that is both rational and irrational at the same time. If war, then, is both physical and metaphysical, it will require us, demand of us, to use our reason and our intuition. Listen not to me, but rather to the Logos. It is wise to agree that all things are one. Now, this comes from Heraclitus. There are arguments as to what he meant by Logos. Some will say that it means ration, reason. Others will say that it means that it's some like karmic force out there that you can tap into. As you can imagine, I'm going to go for the second part, that the Logos is something out there that, if you're willing to listen, you can tap into it and use it to help guide some of your decisions. Now, reflecting on my time in Afghanistan and Somalia, it's clear to me at the lower levels, where sergeants and young officers actually do the fighting, they have a visceral understanding of war. Going into combat with a 40-man infantry platoon or a 12-man special forces detachment, or like your son, going in with SEALs ready to do battle, one can almost sense the violence, passion, and poetic energy that permeates the atmosphere. It's at this level that those closest to war develop a relationship with it, a comfort with it, an understanding of it that allows them to function at high levels in a sleep-deprived, high-pressured, the next moment may be your last environment. These combat soldiers sense that navigating their way through the flux and contradictions of war requires something that is beyond their ken and is woven into the very fabric of the war that they're fighting. Whether they call it or name it God, karma, or the Logos, they know, quote, that the hidden harmony is superior to the visible. The Logos is the underlying truth of nature. Heidegger's being of beings, presented as, quote, in itself, and at the same time revealing and a concealing. But in truth, soldiers don't call it by a name. As Heidegger might have concluded, ground soldiers simply dwell in that Logos. And like the early Greeks, they don't think of it, nor do they represent it in language. It's unspoken, it's unwritten, it's infinite, it's all-knowing, and it's understanding. And it's what we call intuition. The only requirement for a soldier to intuit the Logos is that he follows Heraclitus' admonition to listen properly and to have the courage to act upon what he hears. The challenge, however, is to listen properly even as you become more distant from the battlefield, either by physical location or rank. A quote from the Iliad. He spoke, and Achilles, famed for his spear, sprang from the bank and leapt into the middle of the stream. If you've read my bio tonight, I hope you haven't, but if you've read my bio tonight, you know that for some reason I am seized by this scene in the Iliad, where Achilles, who's on an open plain in battle, suddenly comes into a confrontation with the river god. And without thinking, Achilles goes right into battle. He sees the river for what it was, so he didn't deliberate, nor did he fear. Achilles, as part god and part man, the son of Thetis, listened to the Logos and acted poetically, intuitively. To calculate, to think, would have slowed him down, broken his movement, and perhaps led to hesitation or fear. Rationally derived, his actions would have been less authentic, and if you believe Aristotle in Book 6 of Poetics, immoral. Like Achilles, I believe we all have something in us that relates us to the Logos, that lightning bolt that steers nature around us. So here's our aha moment, because it's not just war, is it? What about politics, diplomacy, love, our spirituality? There are a whole host of human activities that seem to defy mathematization. They're beyond enumeration. These human endeavors possess an infinite amount of variables that collide at every moment, making it impossible for mankind to create certainty or eliminate risk. Heraclitus showcases this risk when he says, "One cannot step twice into the same river, nor can one twice take hold of a mortal substance in a stable condition. For by the quickness and swiftness of its alteration, it scatters and gathers. At the same time, it endures and dissolves, approaches and departs." After leaving St. John's, I migrated to the U.S. Department of State, where I became the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs. In this role, it's my responsibility to coordinate the diplomatic efforts to bring home Americans that have been held hostage by terrorist groups or wrongfully detained by nation-states like Venezuela, Iran, and Russia. When I took this job, I went to talk to my two predecessors, both of whom have been quite successful in bringing home American citizens. Both told me there was no cookie-cutter solution to hostage negotiations. Every case is different. Every case requires a unique solution. Now, I tested that advice, but after some time concluded that they were right. There would be no oracle for me to consult. AI will not be coming to my rescue. As such, I found myself returning to my time as a soldier and a student at St. John's College, rationally and mathematically preparing for every negotiation, but leaving room for intuition once I sit down to the negotiating table. Otto von Bismarck, one of the greats of diplomacy, said, "A statesman must wait until he hears the steps of God sounding through events, then leap up and grasp the hem of his garment." Does that sound like a guy who's mathematizing diplomacy? He's feeling something, isn't he? He's sensing it, and he's taking advantage of that moment. When faced with the fog, friction, and chance that surrounds war, diplomacy, and other things that cannot and should not be mathematized, I remember Clausewitz, who wrote, "If the mind is to emerge unscathed with the relentless struggle with the unforeseen, two qualities are indispensable. First, an intellect that, even in the darkest hour, retains some glimmerings of the inner light which leads to truth. And second, the courage to follow this faint light wherever it may lead." So I will conclude now, but in doing so, I'm going to add a little bit of Croesus where we started. There are some takeaways that I would like you to leave with. And honestly, there's some people that are starting their lives. I look at the middies here. I look at the young folks that are going through St. John's College. Let me save you 10 or 20 years of thinking about this. Let's kind of speed up your clock, and let me lay some wisdom down on you, if I may. Here are things I want you to take away from this. When you're wrestling with some of the tough things in life, know the nature of the problem to be solved. Determine what can be mathematized and what can not. Start to be more conscious of the nature of the problems you're addressing. If it can be reduced, mathematize it. If it cannot, intuit. And if intuiting, start to work on listening to your inner voice and then on acting. If I can bottom line that, if you end up in the NASA program and you're going to put a ship on Mars, by all means, please, I'm begging you, mathematize it. But if you're going to war, if you're trying to decide who to marry, which stocks to buy, or whether you're going to negotiate for the release of Brittany Griner, I'm asking you, start listening to that voice inside and see what it starts to tell you. And by the way, spoiler alert, some people may find out that they have no ability to use their intuition, and that's okay. So we're going to move on. Point number 2, intuition has a shelf life. Remember what we said, what Pascal said. He said that there's a time component to this intuition. Seeking an oracle, prolonged praying, excessive hand-wringing, it takes you someplace, but not to intuition. Remember Pascal, you see it at a glance. You have to see the whole thing at once. If all the inputs are required to make a decision are reviewed and over an extended period of time, one will most likely to continue to use their reason, thereby mathematizing any intuitive impulse and turning it into something alien to its nature. The third thing, relationships matter. When Croesus finally got his prophecy, his inability to understand that revelation indicates that one must have a strong relationship with whom or whatever's providing that intuition, what we might refer to as nature. Now, whether that nature, you personally describe that as the Holy Spirit, the Logos, some other divine power, or karma, if you're interested in tapping into this intuitive side, you must remove the obstacles that distance you from this nature and start working on strengthening that relationship. Put plainly, Croesus should have established and maintained a clear line of communication with the provider of intuition, nature, and not the oracle. And lastly, when dealing with nature, it's not about you. The demise of Croesus shows us that when making an intuitive decision, or any decision derived from godlike inputs, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to get a desired outcome for you personally. Marcus Aurelius writes that we must not only turn to that divine genius within us, but we must welcome, quote, what happens and is allotted as issuing from the same source, whatever it may be, from which the man himself has issued. Put another way, you have to trust in your intuition to deliver the best result, not for you, but for nature. To conclude, I believe that the story of Croesus shows us that the very clear sight and accurate mind of which Pascal has written is best put to use by establishing a strong relationship with nature and knowing that which cannot be and which can and cannot be mathematized. When faced with making a decision in an atmosphere of ambiguity, one should use reason to get as close as they possibly can to the issue at hand before engaging intuition. However, once intuition is brought to bear, one must return those results over to nature and gracefully accept the results that she delivers. Thank you very much for your time and attention tonight. Am I taking questions? I would love to.
You will, but we first take a 10-minute or so coffee break.
Oh, thank goodness. All right, so we 10-minute coffee break, and let's get some questions on. I expect you to be tough. By the way, I intend to be provocative. I'm not even sure I believe half of what I said. So I'm going to ask you to challenge me, and if you want to get into some of the stuff I do in my day job, I'll take that too. So, all right, thank you.